Hi, Smart News. Let's get you read in on the week ahead with a few big stories. We're going to travel overseas to the Middle East. We're going to talk about a law in Mississippi that's making national headlines. And there's also a comment made by a top health official in the United States on COVID-19 that I'm just sort of curious learning more about. So let's get started. First to the Middle East, and we're continuing to watch a developing story that involves Israel, Hamas in Gaza, and the West Bank. There are multiple dynamics to this story. As you know, the bottom line is this conflict is escalating and there's really no end in sight. And we can't forget the innocent families on all sides impacted by this. There are a lot of headlines I'm seeing today that have to do with what America is doing or not doing in the region. Why does anyone care about that? Well, here's why. Israel is arguably America's closest ally in the Middle East, and we have a new administration. And so there's a lot of attention on the Biden administration and what is their next steps, because the thinking is how the Biden administration handles this crisis will give us some insight as to what is their policy in the Middle East. What is their priority? Do they have the power to influence? How do they want to spend their diplomatic capital? What does that actually look like? So do they want to take a strong stance on this issue? Or are there other issues like the Iran nuclear deal that they would like to prioritize instead? This is why we're closely watching what the White House is saying on this issue and why you should too. Back here at home, you're likely to see some headlines involving the state of Mississippi, abortion law, and the Supreme Court. So here's what's happening here. Back in 2018, Mississippi passed a new abortion law restricting most abortions after 15 weeks. Now, there's been a trend overall in America. We're seeing some states pass more restrictive abortion laws. We're seeing other states pass more permissive abortion laws. The states that are restricting abortion are challenging really current American law on abortion that legalizes abortion with limits. And there's a parameter where the states within that law can set certain limits on abortion. This is why different states have different abortion laws. Now, the state of Mississippi has never been allowed to enforce this law because it's been caught up in legal challenges. And the Supreme Court said today, we're going to hear that case. So this is why it matters. It's thought that the Supreme Court will set a precedent with this case. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of Mississippi, which would be against the lower court rulings, then the thinking is this would allow more restrictive abortion laws to stand. And this could change abortion law in America. On the other side, though, if the Supreme Court rules in favor with the lower courts that have said this law can't stand, then there's the thought that this would set a precedent to say these restrictive abortion laws that states are trying to pass can't actually be legal in America. So these are the stakes. The Supreme Court will not hear this case until later this fall, and we likely will not get a decision on this case until mid-2022. Let's finish up with a little news on the COVID-19 pandemic in America. The big headline is that cases overall are decreasing. However, there's an interesting story happening with the New York Yankees, the baseball team. There are 9 individuals as of this recording who have tested positive for COVID-19. They include a player, a few coaches, some staff members. But here's the interesting twist. All of these individuals received the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine several weeks ago. So these are breakthrough infections when someone has received the vaccine but still gets COVID. The CDC director says she wants to learn a little bit more about this case, which we do too. But she says this is an example of the vaccines working because most of these individuals are asymptomatic and no one has severe illness. I was listening closely to what Dr. Fauci said about this scenario as well, and I want you to listen here.
What you seem to be saying is they have no symptoms and we don't need to worry about them spreading because they've all been vaccinated.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not going to be absolute zero, but the likelihood, John, of their spreading is really very, very low. And that's one of the reasons why they're even talking about if you are vaccinated, that you're going to cut down on the testing of individuals, because even if they test positive, the likelihood of their transmitting to someone else is really very, very low.
So I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about that. If we test vaccinated people differently than others, how does that affect data collection, especially as this pandemic and virus is evolving? Also, over the last year, we've been told how significant asymptomatic spread is for COVID-19. So how does an asymptomatic person with COVID differ from an asymptomatic person with COVID who's been vaccinated? What is the science behind that? That's some of the questions I'm going to be asking, especially because this is a cluster of cases that we're seeing within the New York Yankees. So that's what I'm curious about this week. What are you curious about? Let me know. Questions and comments. We love hearing from you. And as always, more on smartnews.com. Have a great week.